Yeah, I'll react to that, sure.
Jacobite Rebellion, also known as the Jacobite Uprising.
Okay, guys. Why is my computer slow? Jacobite. Again, all these terms like Jacobite, they're not going to be related terms. I'm just saying terms that Jacobite, Angevin, Carolingian, what's that type of Christianity? Starts with a C. Anyways, this is one of those terms that I don't. It always escapes me what it is when I hear it, and so I'm trying to learn, get it down. That's what we're here to do.
Rising.
Let's go. The original link to the video, top the description, Discord below that. Would love to have you. How did the Jacobite Rebellion actually happen? Let's go.
White Rebellion, also known as the Jacobite Uprising, made widely popular by the Starz series Outlander, was one of Scotland's biggest events of modern history. Often viewed as a battle between Catholics and Protestants, though not quite so simple, the most famous clash of the rebellion was its last, the Battle of Culloden. But where, why, and when did it begin? And who really were the Jacobites? The beginning of our timeline can be placed at the close of the 1688 Glorious Revolution in England, when the Catholic King James II of England and Ireland and 7th of Scotland was ousted and exiled to France alongside his wife and infant son. He was shortly replaced by his
okay.
The 1688 Glorious Revolution in England, when the Catholic King James II of England and Ireland and 7th of Scotland was ousted and exiled to France alongside his wife and infant son, he was shortly replaced by his Protestant daughter Mary and her husband, William of Orange. This stirred up outrage from both Catholics and...
Okay, that's my anchor point. William of Orange time.
William of Orange. This stirred up outrage from both Catholics and supporters of the House of Stuart alike, and those who believed that only God could appoint a monarch, not Parliament, which had decided in both England and Scotland that James II had vacated the throne and would consequently be succeeded by Mary and William. An initially minuscule amount of disapproval now began to build, and even to cross borders. A movement was developing across England, Scotland, and even Ireland in support of the deposed king, which became known as Jacobitism, or simply the Jacobites. Eventually, the Jacobites found support throughout Western Europe, and this was only the start. Over the next few years, there were some events organized by the growing Jacobites in an immediate attempt to restore King James to the throne. In 1689, a man by the name of Viscount Dundee led a coalition at the Battle of Killiecrankie, in which...
Okay, so I love having a anchor point, or like the William of Orange. So it's so much easier when you have a tangential or adjacent historical event that you know a bit more about that is connected to an event you really don't know about a lot about at all, and that's kind of my point. So when William of Orange came over and got the crown with Mary, where it's not important if I get the names wrong just now, but the people who wanted James, who was in exile to France, to come back and be the king again, were the Jacobites.
Which the Jacobites defeated a throne. In 1689, a man by the name of Viscount Dundee led a coalition at the Battle of Killiecrankie, in which the Jacobites defeated a Protestant Covenanter force, although Dundee himself and a significant number of his Jacobites were casualties of the clash. The next month, nonetheless, another rebellion was sparked in Dunkeld, Scotland, but this one ultimately failed. In 1690, the new King William and former King James faced off against each other at the Battle of the Boyne across the border in Ireland. William and his troops came out victorious and seemingly put an end to the Jacobites' rebellion. Soon, King William, determined to ensure an end to the uprising, offered pardons to any Scottish Highlands Jacobites who would swear allegiance to the crown. Those who refused to do so by the end of 1691 would face severe consequences. For the most part, Jacobitism had fizzled out, and now in 1701, the exiled James II passed away. Still.
Okay, guys, so the King Charles beheading, and then so it was King Charles. So this is quite an eventful time in English history, huh? Or so you had the 30 Years' War in Europe in the mid 1600s, right? And then you have the Charles executed, and then you have Cromwell, and then Charles II, right? Let me know if I'm getting any of this wrong. It's a very high possibility I am. And then William of Orange. No, and then James II after Charles II? Okay, it might seem like I'm really not getting it, guys, but I'm building the foundation. I really am. Okay.
The exiled James II passed away.
Oh, sorry, and you have the Great Northern War going on, or just ending, and you have the War of the Spanish Succession too, which is also going on at this time, right? So late 1600s seems to be a very tumultuous time in Europe.
King Louis, the exiled James II, passed away. Still, King Louis XIV of France, where the Stuarts had been residing, recognized the ousted monarch's son, also named James, as the true heir to Great Britain's throne. In 1708, an attempt was made by the French to bring the younger James to Edinburgh, but it unfortunately failed. During this time, changes had been made to the monarchy in England, and subsequently in Scotland as well, now that the Acts of Union had been signed in 1707, formally creating Great Britain. By this point, the throne of William and Mary had been passed down to George I of Hanover. The crowning of this new king prompted a fresh wave of Jacobitism, and what would later be known as the 15 broke out in Braemar.
I get it, it's annoying, but I need to learn.
The throne of William and Mary, now that the Acts of Union had been signed in 1707, formally creating Great Britain. By this point, the throne of William and Mary had been passed down to George I of Hanover. The crowning of this new king prompted a fresh wave of Jacobitism, and what would later be known.
Why exactly did the Jacobites, when they were defeated, and then quelled, and then the Great Britain was created, why were they shocked when it would be handed down to George?
Known as the 15 broke out in Braemar, Scotland, and what would later be known as the 15 broke out in Braemar, Scotland, with the initial goal of taking Stirling Castle. The Earl of Mar was responsible for launching this new uprising, and his supporters vastly outnumbered the opposing Hanover defenders. The Earl traveled all the way from London without any commission from the Stuart heir himself to raise the standard of James VIII and III alongside his fellow Jacobites. The government tried to discourage this aggression by passing the Habeas Corpus Suspension Act of 1715, which stripped the land of Jacobite rebels and instead gave ownership of the properties to their tenants, who supported the crown.
Habeas corpus, is that when you sort of suspend the law? Is a recourse in law through which a person can report an unlawful detention. Okay, so when you suspend it, it's pretty much saying we can arrest and detain anyone we want, essentially. Oh God, where was it? Oh no, come on. I'm gonna move this over here.
This, of course, was not enough to break the Jacobite spirit, and the rebellion continued. At first, the Earl and his supporters were remarkably successful, capturing Gordon Castle, Inverness, Dundee, Aberdeenshire, and most of the surrounding area, aside from Fort William and Stirling Castle. Nonetheless, after defeating most of their enemies above the Firth of Forth, the Jacobites, now totaling almost 20,000, seemed to stall. The Earl of Mar was unsure of what their next move should be, and in turn gave the opposing Duke of Argyll time to better prepare for the next incursion. This also allowed time for James Stewart to finally give the Earl of Mar his commission and official position as the commander of the Jacobite army. Finally, now fully backed by the Jacobite heir, the Earl led his men to Stirling Castle, where his troops outnumbered the Hanover side by 3-1. The adversaries crossed paths on November 13th for what would become known as the Battle of Sheriffmuir. The outcome of this clash was somewhat indecisive, as the Hanover forces took heavy casualties but managed to prevent the Jacobites from taking Stirling Castle. Simultaneously, another Jacobite offensive was beaten down at Preston, and Inverness fell into the hands of the Hanovers. There were some additional battles fought in England at the same time, but none were decisively successful. And with foreign Jacobites from places such as France and Spain withdrawing their support, the rebellion yet again fizzled out. It was now on the shoulders of Charles Stuart, or the Young Pretender, to rekindle the Jacobite momentum on behalf of himself and his father. The Stuart family had already been pushed out of France after decades of spending their exile there, due to a treaty signed between France and England in 1716, which complicated matters further. Nevertheless, the Pope decided to invite the Catholic Stuarts to Rome, where he offered money and a palace to James, which allowed the family to begin rebuilding their Jacobite support. Minor uprisings and a general movement remained over the subsequent 30 years.
Guys, at what point did the Pope sort of lose that power of being able to do stuff like this? Like it seems like the Pope was such a powerful person until he became much less powerful. Still powerful, but not in like a kingly way, sort of seems. Does that make sense?
But uprisings and a general movement remained over the subsequent 30 years, but the next large-scale rebellion didn't come until 1745. Known also as the 45 Rebellion, this would be the most significant and final Jacobite uprising. Planning had begun back in 1743, when a Treaty of Fontainebleau was signed by Philip V of Spain and his nephew, Louis, in France, agreeing to join the Jacobites in an alliance against Britain. The initial goal was for the French naval squadron to leave from Brest and draw the Royal...
Sorry, guys, think about being so that insanely powerful that you can be like, you can control France and then call up your friend, your cousin or whatever, your relative, and just be like, hey, so should just like controlling absolutely in two giant powers, Spain especially at this time was much more powerful than it becomes later. But just that idea is crazy to me. Like, oh yeah, France will go. Let me call up Spain, and it's that easy because you're related. The fact that so much power of nations were controlled by just a few people is I'm sure they were pretty insane, you know, and probably very egotistical and whatnot, but I would still love to meet someone like this and just see what they're like. I feel like there's no one kind of comparable in the world today. Not Putin, not Xi Jinping, definitely not the U.S. president, because he doesn't have nearly as much power as over their country as someone like Putin has over his, or Xi over his. But like to have unquestionable, you decide if you go to war or not. You can talk to your cousin and no questions asked, or seemingly no questions asked. I just want to see what they were like. That, you know,
to join the Jacobites in an alliance against Britain. The initial goal was for the French naval squadron to leave from Brest and draw the Royal Navy, who had become aware of a planned invasion, out after them in January of 1744. This plan failed and caused a startling number of casualties for the French. Finally, in March, Louis called off the invasion and instead declared outright war on Britain. By August, Charles himself traveled to Paris in hopes of negotiating a new strategy with the French, who now seemed unwilling to back the Jacobite cause as they once had intended. The Jacobites back in Scotland were also hesitant now, and greatly troubled by the lack of French reinforcement. Most argued that it would be foolish to launch a new attack without the foreign aid. But Charles pushed the argument that the French would, in fact, come to support them once they had begun a new incursion. At the start of 1745, the French did decide to give 2 ships to the Jacobites, the Dutelle and Elizabeth. By summer, Charles himself boarded the Dutelle, which would eventually take him to Eriskay on July 23, 1745. Still, the Scots were skeptical. Many wanted the young pretender to return back to France until he could arrive with genuine French military support. Charles refused.
What are you doing here?
And was soon able to convince many of his skeptics to commit to the cause as it was. By August, the first stages of the rebellion had begun, and the Jacobites were on the move. The following month, Charles arrived in Edinburgh and, remarkably unopposed, proclaims James Stuart as King of Scotland and himself as regent on the 17th. A few days later, Charles and his men met with the government forces led by Sir John Cope at what would become known as the Battle of Preston Pans. The Jacobites were inferiorly equipped and numbered only about 2,500, with the government army only totaling a few hundred less. Cope's troops were less experienced than that of Charles, though, and the latter quickly routed their opponent. This not only boosted the morale of the Scottish Jacobites, but also seems to encourage the French, who soon sent over weapons, financial support, and an envoy to reassure the Jacobites of their aid. The Scots themselves appeared to be in further trouble nonetheless, as disagreements between different groups and factions within the movement started to climb to the immediate surface. After a failed and controversial invasion of England, the Jacobites would shortly arrive on Culloden Moor, where the final and most brutal battle of the Jacobite rebellion erupted. The Battle of Culloden was fought on April 16, 1746, made up of roughly 7,000 Jacobites against 8,000 government troops. The bloody clash lasted a pitiless hour and resulted in nearly 2,000 Jacobite casualties, with hundreds more taken prisoner. It was an undeniable and devastating victory for the British government, leaving the Jacobite cause completely broken down. Even Charles was ready to give up and ordered the survivors of the deadly clash to disperse.
To be honest, I'm surprised that Charles was even to win the first battle.
Small portion of the remaining Jacobites attempted to fight on. There was no real revival of the Jacobite cause. The crackdown on the rebels and Highlanders as a whole following Culloden was crushing. The clan system throughout the Highlands was destroyed. The Highland clearances, the Dress Act, and other attacks on clan power and even culture marked the end of Highland life as it was once known. The Jacobite rebellion.
So, does Scotland view Charles as a good or bad figure, I wonder? See, he wasn't extremely ready. Everyone was like, what are you doing here? Get out. They won one, but then probably Scotland ended up being worse off than before. But I mean, that's with hindsight. You never know, I guess.
Highland life as it was once known. The Jacobite rebellion ultimately ended in failure and disastrous consequences, particularly for the Scottish Highlanders. Today, the Jacobite uprising still sparks heated debate and controversy. But one thing is certain: Scottish history was forever changed by the Jacobite rebellion.
Super fascinating, guys. Sorry for all the pausing, but I really, especially on topics that have confused me and that I've definitely learned about on a few occasions and still don't know them, like off the top of my head, what happened, I get extra frustrated, and so I want to make sure I absorb as much as I can, meaning the rewinding a bit. So, I'd appreciate any answers to my question, guys. I'm going to try and learn about... I'm not even going to say step by step through Kings, but maybe I won't, so why am I saying anything? I hope you guys are doing well. Would appreciate any answers to the question, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye, guys.